Hello and welcome to the monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook for the Great Plains and Midwest. My name is John Eyes and I'm with the National Weather Service Central Region Headquarters in Kansas City. I will be today's moderator. Before we begin our introduction, we have muted everyone's lines so everyone may enjoy the full benefit of this call. Thank you. Our speaker today is Dr. Jim Angel. He is from the Illinois State Water Survey, and he's also the Illinois State Climatologist at the University of Illinois. Following the briefing, we will open up the lines to take questions. Now, let's turn it over to Dr. Angel. Jim?
Thank you, John. Well, welcome to the Great Plains and Midwest Climate Outlook on this May 21st day of 2015, and I'm Jim Angel, and we've started off here. We got a picture from a little bit of snow from yesterday, or earlier, I guess yesterday, in the Dismal River Basin in Nebraska there. So I guess maybe that's appropriately named to be getting snow in late May like this, but we'll see in a minute that that is not unique to the Dismal River. So just to get some housekeeping out of the way here, we've got just some general information on this, these and other webinars. This is kind of a joint effort on climate services in the central region. Includes Dennis Toddy, the South Dakota State climatologist, and myself, and Doug Cluck, and John Ice, and several other state climatologists and their staff in the central region, as well as the regional climate centers and the NOAA Prediction Center and Iowa State University and the National Drought Mitigation Center. Our next one will be on June 18th, and that will be Pat Ganan, my counterpart in Missouri, the Missouri State climatologist. You can access all these webinars, the future ones, by going to the link there for drought.gov. You can see the presentations and slides of past ones at either the Midwestern Regional Climate Center or the High Plains Climate Center at the links there. So, and if you just kind of search on their website, it's pretty obvious where they are. So that'll, if you ever want to come back to any of either this one or any of the others. And there will be time, as John mentioned, for questions at the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's happened so far, what happened in 2015, April 2015 that was special, and then we'll look at current conditions and the impacts that we've seen so far this year, or at least in the last month, and then the outlooks that just came out this morning. So looking back at temperatures across the U.S. and the central region in particular, we were, for the most part, pretty warm in April. It's a big change from what we've been experiencing for the last couple of months of below average temperatures, actually in many cases above and much above average on the temperatures. If you look at the statewide numbers of the 17th warmest April on record for the U.S., and that's with records going back to 1895. So just kind of an overall warm April there across the U.S. We haven't seen that in a while, where we've got everybody on the same page on the temperature for the U.S. there. So that's the temperature side of things. If you look at the precipitation, here's a little different story in April, where we have much of the south and parts of the east there that were very, very wet in April. In fact, if you look at places like Kentucky and West Virginia, they just really got lots of rainfall, much above average precipitation over the April time period. In fact, there's some places in Kentucky I think got about 2 to 3 times their average precipitation for April. So lots of rain down in that area, and then you turn around and look at other parts of the upper Midwest and High Plains there. We've got several states, Montana, the Dakotas, and Minnesota, that were dry in April. In fact, South Dakota was the 11th driest on record, and we got Minnesota at 17th driest, and North Dakota at 16th driest. So very dry conditions up there in that part of the central region. And then you kind of look through the central part of the central region there, we're actually close to average on the precipitation. So big contrast north and south there for the month of April. If you look at accumulated snowfall in the last 30 days, Right. The interesting story there is we've gotten quite a bit of snow out west. You saw the picture of Nebraska there, but that's true of the Dakotas and also Colorado and Wyoming there. So we got some late season snowfall there, and in some cases we actually got some pretty significant accumulations going on. So it's a little late in the season, so those are above average numbers. All the averages are pretty small this time of year, so it doesn't take too much to make that happen. And a little bit of snow up in the UP of Michigan and parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota as well there. So again, a little bit unusual, but not necessarily record-breaking or anything like that. So that's the accumulated snowfall. If you look at the 30-day precipitation, this is a map across the region there, and so the color coding is that the yellows and oranges there are a little bit drier values, and the greens are a little wetter, and the wettest are the areas that are 8 inches or more in the blues there. So kind of get that warm color spectrum going there. So yellow and orange is dry. So we've got, if you look at the last 30 days there are some areas that were fairly dry. Earlier we talked about Kentucky being very wet, but actually they've gotten some breaks in the last couple of weeks, maybe a little bit welcome relief from not having rain all the time. So really the eastern half of the region there is actually pretty dry for the last 30 days, and you got some areas in the central part of the region there, especially the Kansas and Nebraska, that really got a lot of rain in the last 30 days. In that area in the part of southeastern Nebraska was exceptionally wet in the last 30 days there. But we had some other hot spots there, some wet spots as well across the region. So that's the actual precipitation. This is the departure, so that maybe gives you a better idea because there's a pretty steep gradient on wetness from, on average, from east to west. So when we talk about 4 inches in Illinois, that's not that big a deal, but 4 inches in Kansas, that is a big deal. So for the month of April. So this is looking at last 30-day precipitation departures. So the oranges and reds are the below average precipitation amounts. So there again, you still see that kind of dryness in the eastern half of the region. But now the wetness out west in the western half really shows up. So even some of those areas that didn't get a lot of precipitation, that's actually above average for this time of year. So those are some really standout areas. You see, like I mentioned before, the southeast Nebraska area, but we got some spots up at really from Minnesota and parts of Iowa and Missouri westward there that were 1 to 3 inches above average in terms of the green colors, and then the 3 to 6 inches in the blue colors there. So lots of wetness out west, so a big turnaround there on the precipitation. And this one is, I had to kind of shift maps here, so I apologize for that, but I wanted to get a little more control on the dates there. So this is what the story was before all of that precipitation was, that we actually had very dry conditions across the central region. Pretty much from the Dakotas eastward was very dry, and we had some very, very dry areas across Missouri and Illinois and Iowa and Indiana there. And then you can see the wetness up the Ohio River Valley there. So just actually, if you'd asked me a month ago what my biggest worry was, that I was concerned that parts of the Midwest were kind of slipping into kind of droughty conditions as we move forward into the growing season. But if you go back to that other slide there, it's that in the last 30 days, it's really turned around in many areas. There's few spots in Iowa, Missouri, and Wisconsin are still a little bit dry, but otherwise it's as far as the precipitation the last 30 days. But that rain, especially out west, really made a difference on kind of recovering from some of this earlier dryness. This 30-day temperatures, departures from average, and the greens there just means it's about 1 to 4 degrees below average, so really fairly cool conditions. Probably doesn't tell the whole story because we kind of swung back and forth between weeks of fairly warm conditions and weeks of fairly cool conditions. And so in most cases, they kind of cancel each other out because we actually had some very warm days in there, some warm weeks during that time period, but it kind of got counterbalanced by the coolness there. So there's a lot going on there in terms of the temperatures over the last 30 days. But overall, it kind of worked out in the end to be close to average in the east there, but a little bit below average in much of the central region. So this is kind of a new product by the MRC, the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, part of their vegetation impact program, and it's the number of consecutive hours below 32 degrees in the last 7 days. So what it's trying to portray is that it's not just the low temperature that may be a problem; it's the fact that it stays at a very cold temperature for long periods of time. So this is one attempt to try to track that. So we're looking at here, if it's in the, I don't know what color that is, kind of almost looks like a peach or something on my screen, but the kind of the light reds or whatever, they're not too many hours there. So that's actually pretty typical for this time of year. But then you get over in the areas that are in the blues, now you're looking at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours that were below 32 degrees at some point in the last 7 days. So we've had a couple of doses of cold weather this week, and especially it really stands out in parts of Colorado and Wyoming there, and the North Dakota especially, and parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And you see all those blues up there. So we had some areas there that we're kind of expecting to see some impacts from this kind of late season frost and freeze episodes that we've had this week. So we'll talk a little bit more about those impacts here in a minute, but just kind of give you a sense of where all the action was as far as the really cold temperatures and how long it stayed cold. So this is the stream flow. I always like stream flow because it kind of, if I had to look at one map to see what the situation was of drought in the central region, this would probably be my first choice because it's a good diagnostic of how wet the water, the whole system is in terms of stream flows and even soil moisture. It kind of gives you a hint of that as well. So green is good. That means you're in the central part of the distribution there, that 25th to 75th percentile. And we have many places out west there that you can see that are in the blues and in some places in the black. So actually well above average and in some cases close to the record there. So we've got very wet conditions pretty much across the central region. You really have to go out to western Colorado and Wyoming and Montana there to see some below average stream flows there. So right now everything looks pretty good. It looks better than it did a month ago in terms of stream flows in many areas there. So as far as the water cycle goes, that's a good sign. Now if we look at Great Lake water levels, I just checked this out earlier today, and we've actually have a nice recovery on lake levels. If we talked about this a year or two ago, the big concern was much below average lake levels. Now, many of the lakes are actually above average from their long-term average for May. That includes Lake Superior, Michigan Huron, and Lake Sinclair. And Lake Erie is about average right now, and Ontario is a little bit low. And I think what we're seeing is the reflection of very cold winter, which kind of reduced the evaporation off the lake, especially when they iced over. And then also the fact that we've gotten quite a bit of rain, especially in the last 30 to 90 days in many parts of the basin there. So right now the Great Lakes look in pretty good shape as far as the water levels go. This is the water temperatures across the Great Lakes region. I'm not sure I'm ready to jump in there and go for a swim, except maybe some parts of Lake Erie might be halfway tolerable. But if you look at Lake Superior there's still a little bit of ice over in the eastern part of the region on the Canadian side there, right at there's a kind of gray shading there. That's an indication there's a little bit of ice left there. That's about it for the Great Lakes right now. Everybody else is pretty much ice-free, and although Lake Superior, like I said, it doesn't look too inviting for swimming at this point in time. It's still pretty cool out there. This is soil temperature, so switching back to the central region, we've kind of got a patchwork quilt of soil temperature networks across the central region here, and so this is one attempt at putting that together. Again, this is from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. So you can kind of see here with the color scheme there, the warmer color or the warmer soil temperatures down in, as you would expect, in the southeastern part of the region, and the coldest temperatures up in the northwest there. So you got a lot of detailed information out there from North Dakota with soil temperatures still down in the well below 50 in some of those areas in the northern part of that state. But even some other parts of the Dakotas and the western states there have soil temperatures still below 50 degrees, whereas for most of the corn and soybean belt, many of those temperatures are now above 50 to 55 degrees. So that's 50 degrees is kind of the magic number when things really start to take off in terms of growth there. So again, not anything unexpected. It's kind of that's how these things play out. So we would expect the temperatures to obviously warm up as we move forward here. So that's the temperature size story. Here's some graphs from the Missouri River Basin. This is the snowpack that we still have there at Fort Peck and to Garrison there on the actual snowpack and the amount of water that's actually in there. So if you look at the numbers, the blue line, or kind of dark blue line on our, or at least on my screen here, is where we stand right now. And you look at the red line, which is the long-term average, 1981 to 2010 average, you can see that we're looking in pretty good shape there, or actually a little above average there, and so that's looking good at this point. So
Jim?
that's yes, and Kevin, you might, if you want to jump in at this point.
Can I clarify this just a little bit? Yeah, this
Sure.
is Kevin Thompson, Corps of Engineers, and the current snowpack is the blue shaded region. So we are looking at snowpack that is much more or much below normal this year in what we consider two reaches of the upper Missouri River Basin in the northern Rockies. So our snowpack did peak much below normal and continues to be much below normal at this time of year. Oh, okay. And so the dark blue line, that was for 2011. If you go back to the previous slide there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Switch back there.
Yeah. So the dark blue line was 2011.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah. So you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
And then on this slide, we're just giving an update of where our runoff forecast for the upper Missouri River Basin would be this year. Due to that much below normal snowpack, we are predicting below normal runoff. However, we have had some additional runoff during the month of May, and just a preliminary look at what we would have by the end of May, the runoff appears to be about normal, which would be the red bars. But for the remainder of the year, since we have below normal snowpack, we are expecting below normal runoff. So this is a little bit of a bump in our forecast from about 19.3 million acre feet up to 20.5, but the normal is 25.3. So still, in the end, about 80% of normal runoff. I think there might be one more slide on the Platte River system. This was provided by the Omaha District of the Corps of Engineers, just showing the snowpack in the North Platte Basin, how it was well below normal for this year, and then the South Platte Basin on the right, which was roughly about normal, and due to some additional snow precipitation that has occurred up there in the last week, the snowpack is holding steady, has had a little bit of gain, while during a normal year it would be declining. But really that situation is about normal, and the Omaha District is just going to continue to monitor that snowpack and the runoff that they have received from the rainfall that has occurred in the South Platte Basin and the Denver area over the last couple of weeks. Back to you, Jim.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So here's the U.S. Drought Monitor for this week, and just came out this morning. So we've still got In the central region, we have drought concerns in the western parts of Colorado and Wyoming at this point, and we've still got some areas of concern up through the parts of Kansas and Nebraska and Minnesota and Wisconsin. But there's been some pretty nice recovery. In fact, if you look at the next slide here, I've got the change in 1 week. And we've had many places, especially in the Central Plains there, that have improved by one category. That's that light green shading there since last week. Now, we kind of have on the drought monitor, there's kind of it's not really a hard and fast rule, but it's kind of a guidance that we try not to change more than one category per week, because we try to, usually droughts are kind of slow moving, so we want to assess the response. But there's probably some areas that have improved even faster than what these two maps imply. It's just that we're being kind of conservative to make sure that we don't jump the gun on there. But there's some pretty nice recovery going on across the central U.S. at this point in time, and really all the way down into Texas there too. So it's good news for most everybody except the poor folks out on the West Coast there. They still got not much change going on out there. But at least in the central region, there is a fair amount of recovery, and much of it's been in the last couple of weeks. So that's great news for us. We still have some concerns in some areas, obviously there in the, like I said, in Nebraska and Kansas and South Dakota and Minnesota and Wisconsin. But I think we're on the road recovery there, and we'll show you why we're a little more optimistic there here in a minute. But so there's the drought monitor changes I mentioned. Just some other impacts real quick here. I got reports from Colorado State climatologist Nolan Doskin, and there have lots of rain and snow over the last month or so, and it's been good timing for the wheat crop, and they've had high water levels on the South Platte and Arkansas River, or I guess it's our Kansas River, and then some issues with delayed planting. But for the most part, they're actually in pretty good shape there. Here's South Dakota, and as we've noted earlier that dramatic shift from dry to wetter conditions over the last couple of weeks. Probably again, like Colorado, a little late for some of the winter wheat, but and also some impacts on the rangeland before we had the recent rains there as well. So, but planting progress is actually ahead of schedule in South Dakota, and we'll see the other states here in a minute. So Minnesota, like we said earlier, great improvements over the last couple of weeks, and a lot of the corn has emerged, which is unfortunate because we just had all that cold weather this week. So being a little bit ahead of schedule has actually kind of maybe hurt us a little bit, and they're still assessing the damage to the corn and soybeans and sugar beets up there. So that's something to look into. So the other states, we haven't heard too many reports yet. It's kind of like no news is good news, I guess. So that's a good thing that we're not hearing that much out of the other states at this point in time. Here's the USDA's report on corn acres planted so far and the departures from average. And so you can see, really, with the exception of Kansas, everybody's got a lot of a lot of corn planted, and it's actually a little bit ahead of schedule, probably about a week or two ahead of schedule. So many places benefited from actually the drier conditions earlier in April and parts of May there, and some of those weeks where we really got some really warm temperatures there. So that kind of helped us out in that regard. So I'll look a little bit at the outlooks here as we move forward. So here's the precipitation forecast for the next 7 days. This is just the potential for precipitation. Texas and Oklahoma have gotten a lot of rain in the last week or so, and it looks like more is on the table for them. But really, there's that creeps up into Kansas, Missouri as well. So there's wet weather ahead there. Look at the 6 to 10 day, 8 to 14 day forecast. I like looking at these because it kind of gives you an idea of the direction we're heading for. So if you look at temperature on the left-hand side, we've got below average temperatures expected in places like Colorado and in the southeast or southwest there. If you look at the eastern part of the Corn Belt, we're looking at increased chance of above average temperatures. So when we've been running cool here lately, so we're probably a little looking forward to a little warmer weather. And then really pretty much across the United States there we got increased chance of above average precipitation, so very wet conditions across much of the U.S. Here's the 8 to 14 day forecast. Now we're getting into early June. On temperatures, pretty much the eastern half of the central region is on the warm side, and a little bit of warmth creeping in the west there. And again, very wet conditions across the whole, pretty much the whole United States there, or lower 48 anyway. Probably the big news that's happened last month has been that El Nino has finally arrived. Just a couple of weeks ago, there's a 90% chance of it continuing this summer, and about 80% chance is expected to continue all the way through the end of 2015. So it's likely going to be a major player not only for the summer, but also the fall and winter months. So just a quick note is that El Nino just means we have above average temperatures along the equator, especially in the eastern half of the Pacific Ocean basin there. So above average temperatures, it affects the weather patterns in the Pacific basin, which then affect our patterns as well. And we'll see what those impacts are here in a minute. So this is just their forecast plume, as we call it. It's just the spread of the models that are predicting how this El Nino is going to play out. And really they all are showing, or there's a fair number of them are showing that we're going to stay with 1 degree Celsius in the El Nino 3.4 region. That's one area of the region that we looked at in the Pacific Ocean we look at. So if you look at more than half of the models are showing that's continuing on into the rest of the season there. So that's with the exception of a few showing it going back to near average conditions, it looks like it's going to be sticking around for a while. If you look at the June temperature and precipitation forecast, now it gets interesting because we look at the temperature side on the left-hand panel there. We have a large area of below average temperatures, or an increased chance of below average temperatures across Texas and Oklahoma and points northward there in the blue shading, and then we've got some warmer temperatures out there in Montana. But probably more interesting is this wide area of above average precipitation. So it's kind of like the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day forecast. We're just seeing wet conditions over a very large area expected in the coming month there of June. And it's kind of the same story on the June, July, and August time frame. On the precipitation side, on the right-hand side, the green of increased chance of above average precipitation, really pretty much from Montana all the way eastward there. There are parts of the central region that are in what we call equal chances. So that's equal chances of above, below, and near average precipitation and or temperature. So those areas that not much to report yet, but you can see that the areas, especially in the southwest portion of the central region, increased chance of both below average temperatures and above average precipitation. So there'd be some nice drought recovery in those areas. If we look at the July, August, and September, so we're kind of sliding forward 1 month here in these 3-month forecasts, and it's kind of a similar story. You see on the left-hand side, the blue area of increased chances of below average temperatures are now creeping into other parts of the Midwest and into the Corn Belt there. So that's you will see kind of a similar situation we saw last year there, cooler temperatures in those areas. And also very wet conditions in the western part of the central region there, increased chance of above average precipitation. So with this El Nino in play, that gives us a little more meat to talk about in terms of summertime outlooks. Usually if there's not much going on in terms of El Nino or La Nina, there's not much to report in the central region. It's usually equal chances across the board during the summertime. So a little bit of excitement there to actually be able to talk about something. So here's August, September, October. We're kind of sliding forward another month and continue that theme of increased chance of a below average temperatures across the Midwest and parts of the Plain States. And as I hinted at earlier, we're starting to see some of the increased chances of above-average temperatures creeping in the very far western part of the central region there. So Montana and Wyoming are getting into that. We look at October through December, and now we're starting to see kind of more of the classic El Nino pattern coming in that we would see in late fall and early winter, of especially of warmer temperatures across the northern states and wetter conditions across the southern states. And so we're kind of seeing that start to play out, so that those above average temperature probabilities are starting to move eastward across the northern states, and you see large areas of increased chances of above average precipitation, really from parts of California all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, Atlantic coast there. We look at December, January, and February, the heart of the next winter. Now you're looking at many of the northern states across the central region have an increased chance of above average temperatures. And also we see a little bit of a probability of dryness in both Montana region and also parts of the Ohio River Valley. But you look at the southern states, it's cold and wet conditions, increased chance of that happening next winter. So that's kind of the classic El Nino signal going on there. So when you look at the seasonal drought outlook, they're actually a little bit optimistic. So those areas kind of in the, I guess it's olive green and tan areas, show that over the next 3 months that they expect drought removal likely, so they're completely out of the drought categories, and then even the areas that are in the tan, which are a little more embedded there, but that they're expected to improve as well. So really pretty much east of the Rocky Mountains and across the central part of the U.S. and actually much of the east, we're seeing some nice improvements expected over the next 3 months, and continued drought conditions as you go on the other side of the mountain range there. So that's the story there. So kind of just to sum it up here before we have turn it over for questions, probably the key point that really stands out in my mind anyway is this rapid turnaround from very dry conditions to very wet conditions in the central region, especially in the western half. We have quite a turnaround, especially in places like Minnesota, which has been in drought for quite some time. So it's a dramatic change over the last couple of weeks. And then the concerns about this late frost freeze issue that may have caused some damage, and we're still hearing about that. So there hasn't been a full assessment of what those impacts are. And as far as the forecast goes, of course, the big story is El Nino and the increased chance of above-average precipitation expected over the central region over the next several months, especially in the west there, where it's probably needed the most at this point in time. But then an increased chance of above-average temperatures in late fall and winter over many of the northern states in the central region. So here's some information on our partners. So then I've mentioned some of this before of where you can find these presentations, and also a lot of the data sources there that we rely on. Many NOAA sites, the regional climate centers, the Drought Mitigation Center, and Climate Prediction Centers are a lot of the go-to sites there that we use quite heavily. So I'll leave this up here in case you're interested in writing those down. And I guess we'll turn back to John for questions.
Well, thank you, Jim. We will now open up the question and answer period. Please use *6 to unmute your line before asking your question. And then when you are finished speaking, please use *6 to mute your line again. Our panelists today are Dennis Toddy, Doug Cluck, of course, Jim Angel, who gave our briefing, Kevin Stom, and Pat Gannon from the University of Missouri. So let's go ahead and go with our first question. Just a reminder, it's *6 to unmute your line to speak.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Bryce Anderson from DTN. Can you hear me?
Sure, Bryce. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Jim, it was good to hear your comments today. And I mentioned this during a NOAA call earlier this morning, but in the past week, the SOI out of the Pacific, the Southern Oscillation Index, has taken a sharp turn into a negative category. Does that reinforce the prospect, in your opinion, for El Nino to to be a true kind of headliner event all the way through this summer and then on into the fall? I know that your forecast was indicating that way anyway, but does that reinforce it, in your opinion?
Well, I haven't looked. I've been watching the SOI quite as closely lately. I would say that what strikes me about this particular El Nino event is that, two things really. One is that it's kind of been lingering in the background in our minds for the last year. I think about a year ago is when we first started talking about El Nino showing up. So it's been a little bit odd in that it's just kind of been hovering near an El Nino, true El Nino event with the warmer water temperatures, but we just haven't seen the atmospheric side come into play until recent weeks. The other thing that's really unusual about this one, too, is the fact that it's over such a large area. A lot of times the El Nino event's really more confined into the eastern part of the ocean basin in the Pacific there, but this one's really spread out across all the regions that we monitor for El Nino events there. So it's a bit different than some of the others we've had. In fact, somebody was saying that all the indices, that there's El Nino regions that extend basically from the coast off of Peru into the central basin, and they're all showing that that El Nino is in play at this point. So it's kind of unusual for them all to be in agreement like that. So that's a bit unusual about this one.
Do you think, if I could ask one more, do you think there's a chance that the intensity of this particular event could rival what we saw back in 97 and 98?
Not really at this point in time. Let's see, let me go back to the plumes here, and hopefully it won't give anybody motion sickness here. But so this is the spread of the forecast. So let's see. So there's 0.5 degrees. That's kind of the threshold for at least a fairly weak El Nino event. So if you get warmer temperatures, that's like the 1 or 2 degrees there. And I think the 97-98 event was actually up in this region there about 2 degrees Celsius above average. So 97-98 was an extraordinary El Nino. I don't think anybody that I've talked to is expecting those kinds of numbers. I think most everybody's talking about a weak to moderate event at this point in time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think we lost you there.
Yeah, now we can't hear you, Doug.
Okay. Well, I guess...
Those are good answers, Jim. I appreciate that.
John,
sure, thank you.
Oh,
you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Bryce, the confusion everybody has right now is this development in the spring. If this was doing this last fall, it'd be one thing, but we're 6 months out of phase on this. There are various models that do warm this up very quickly. I think those are being looked at with a very jaundiced eye. So I would not be calling for any kind of an El Nino to rival 97, 98 yet. But, Jim mentioned that one statistic that somebody pointed out that, we are strongly indicating El Nino in all the regions, which has not happened since that point. So we're not calling for it at this point, but because we're in the spring, it's a very odd time for this to be developing this strongly.
Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Doug.
Despite our best efforts.
So there have been some forecast plumes. In other words, there have been some models that sort of agree on taking this thing to sort of unprecedented levels. But I would caution using those too much right now because it is the wrong time of the year, and we're not really sure what the model is really telling us, because we've seen this before this time of year where, for whatever reason, the models sort of take it and go off into the stratosphere in terms of pushing an El Nino strength.
So I guess what my caveat is, wait a few months, and we should know a little bit more. If it's a consistent sign that these the models continue to go in the same direction at the same sort of strength, then there may be something to that. I think most people are pretty bullish on some sort of El Nino continuing. Whether it's weak, moderate, or strong is a bit out, but it's trending, if you will, towards from the weak to the moderate, I guess, at this point.
Okay, thank you, Doug.
Doug is our resident El Nino killjoy.
Well, thank you, Doug. And do we have any other questions? Or Bryce, was there anything else you had?
Yes, while we're talking about how things are shaping up, I guess I was wondering if we've seen a fair amount of concern on the part of farmers, particularly in southwest Iowa and Missouri, about the issues with with this wet ground causing a lot of delays and so forth. Is this something that you are concerned about being a part of things for a great length of time here yet, or not?
I think this is Jim. In the short term, that could certainly be a concern. If we look back at that one forecast, even for the next 7 days, and really the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14-day forecasts are all leaning towards wetter conditions in the near future. So that could be a problem. The upside is that we are getting warmer, so even just a few days without rain would be enough to, in some cases, on well-drained fields to make a difference there. But so it's that would be, I think, would be a concern moving forward. If they are having trouble now, there's nothing in the forecast to indicate they're going to get much of a break in the near future anyway.
I'm sorry, Jim, could you go back to the mid-April 2015 plume for ENSO? Just for a second.
Okay.
I don't want to belabor this point, but I should have shared, or we should have shared with you, and we still can put this into your presentation before John PDFs it so that everybody can see it, is maybe the comparison between the mid-April and mid-May versions of sort of the model runs. And I would say it's a little stronger in mid-May than it is in mid-April. Okay, so there's the trend, and everybody can see it. And Jim, if you're able to stick it into your presentation, people can pull it off and look at it from your presentation after I send it to you. Okay.
Okay, sure.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. What are the concerns about the flooding in the Gulf Coast region as it relates to agriculture, like in the Texas, Oklahoma area along the Red River?
So we don't actually examine that overly closely, since we're more concerned about sort of the north-central part of the U.S.
Okay.
If there's a specific question, however, you could write to John Ice or Doug Cluck or Jim, any of us, on email, and we could probably find the answer for you.
Okay.
That'd be the best way I'd handle that question.
Sure. Thanks.
If you have a question, it's *6 to unmute your phone. Well, thank you for joining us today for the monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook for the Midwest and Great Plains. We would like to extend an invitation for you to join us again for our next webinar in June, and that'll be on June 18th at 1 p.m. Central. Until then, for Jim Angel and all our panelists, we wish you a good day.